we're just going to hand over. We're just gonna give over to our comrade from the AIDC, Maxine, who will run us through the technical orientations, and then we'll start. Over to you, Maxine.
Thank you, Boipelo. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, good morning, wherever you find yourself in the world. Welcome to the second session of the Pan-African Dialogues. We are very happy to have all of you here. I'm just going to take us through a little bit of the technical requirements, rather, before we get started. The session will be hosted in both English and French. So please, the slide is up on the screen at the moment, and that will help you to activate which channel you wish to listen from, whether that is English or French. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a little globe or a world. You can click on there to select the channel of your choice. Also, please make sure that when you do choose whichever channel that you mute the original audio so that you are able to hear clearly. If you do have any issues with the interpretation channels, please send myself or Remy or Rekang a message on Zoom, and we will assist you with the correct channel. Please also rename yourself on the webinar so that we know who you are, because sometimes it will log in as the name of your phone, and then we won't know your real name. So please put your name, rename yourself accordingly. And then just lastly, some Zoom etiquette to go over. Please, if you are not speaking, please keep your microphone on mute, and also turn your video off if you are not speaking. Comrades are encouraged to make use of the chat box to share any questions and any thoughts, and we will then make sure that we fill that off to the right people. If you have any technical issues, please reach out to either myself, Maxine, or to Remy, or to Rekang. You will see that next to our names it does say tech support. So if you message any one of us, we will be able to assist you. Thank you so much, comrades. We are excited for the session today. I'll hand over back to Boipelo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maxine. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous, and welcome to this first of a series on Pan-Africanism for a radical alternative, hosted on a significant date in the African calendar today, the 25th of May, which is observed across the region as African Liberation Day. Commonly known as Africa Day, today marks a commemoration of the Pan-African unity, which laid the foundation for the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. Because we do not live in isolation from history, commemorative days are important in reminding us to critically reflect on the contemporary meaning of these days and their relevance. Today, in the midst of a global pandemic that has not been consistent in how it's spread across African countries, what has been consistent is that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been unequally absorbed by the region's most vulnerable people. What's also been consistent across the region is the deepening social inequality marked by growing food insecurity, joblessness, high levels of illiteracy, accompanied by large numbers of children dropping out of formal schooling, and of course, systemic violence and conflict. Neocolonialism has ensured that the post-independent African state continues to be a site for the large-scale extraction of resources with minimal to almost no benefit to the majority of the continent's people. So today, the region is in a multi-layered debt crisis with global trade and financial terms in favor of extractive companies at the expense of local communities and specifically women and the environment. As we go into the series, I think our primary objective is to recover historical Pan-Africanist currents of thinking and movement, and to place them in this contemporary and historical moment of deepening crises. We hope that the dialogue will highlight resistances and struggles from below, which shape a people's ecological, feminist, and socialist Pan-Africanism today, and read this against the formal, redundant, and ossified regional and continental bodies. Following today's discussion, we intend on having more discussions, of course. The next session is scheduled for the 13th of June with Isa Shivji, and there'll be another session in June as well as throughout the year, but I think that my colleagues as well later when wrapping up the session will speak to that. While liberation is synonymous with freedom, relief, and unshackling of chains in a political economy which enslaves, marginalizes, and destroys, it's easy for us to focus on the lack of liberation today without recognizing the generations of human struggle which continue today and present a form of Pan-Africanism to be celebrated and developed. It is precisely this strong Pan-Africanism, Pan-African unity, which is also rooted in community struggles, that we seek to recover. So today's lecture with Aziz Fall is titled Pan-African Histories and Perspectives, and it's brought to you by a progressive collective of organizations working on ecological debt as well as development alternatives. These organizations include the African Climate Justice Convergence, the African Ecofeminist Collective, the AIDC in South Africa, ATTAC Morocco, CADTM, GRAIN, HOMEF, the Informal Alliance Against Oil Palm Plantations, JVE, the North African Network for Food Sovereignty, RADD, as well as WoMin. We hope that through the series, we can bring together theory and the ongoing living Pan-Africanism to highlight how communities are navigating these unjust conditions and resisting destructive imperialist policies and projects in the region. So on behalf of this collective, I welcome you to this dialogue and thank you for joining us over the next 2 hours on this African Liberation Day. The structure of the conversation is that over the next hour, we'll listen to Aziz. He'll speak for about 40 minutes. And after Aziz's presentation, Omar Aziki will take over and facilitate the questions and answer sessions as we spend the remainder of the sessions in dialogue. As I introduce Aziz, our guest speaker for the dialogue, I'd like to remind everyone to say hi and where you're joining from in the chat. Please feel free to include the organization, movement, or collective that you're also attached to. As we say, welcome to Aziz. Aziz is an internationalist political scientist from Senegalese and Egyptian origin. Aziz Fall teaches political science, anthropology, international relations, and international development at McGill University and UQAM. He's the former coordinator of the Quebec Network Against Apartheid and a founder and member of Grilla, the first African international campaign against impunity. The case of President Thomas Sankara. Aziz is also the co-founder and coordinator of Assises de la Gauche Mag movement in Senegal. And he's also currently the president of the Auburn Foundation and the Ryerson Progressive Research Center. Thank you so much for leading this discussion today, Aziz. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me for one of the first session for this amazing series and on this very, very special date. For us, it's the African Liberation Day. And this word of liberation, I find quite problematic, as I'm here in Senegal today, celebrating, in fact, negotiated independence. So there is a big difference between those who have obtained their independence through liberation struggle and those who actually negotiated through neo-colonial bid and arrangement. So today I'm delighted to be here among friends and comrades. And, you know, I'm not sure I'm going to lecture to people who actually know exactly what we are talking about. I'm sure many of you are already acquainted with this dimension, so I may recap some of the aspects of this so-called Pan-African nebulosis, but I'm more concerned on the issue of revitalization of Pan-Africanism with a concept I call in French panafricentrage, and we may translate it in English as panafricentricity, which anyway is not also a known word. So it's a word that I have coined to express a self-reliant Pan-African development. Having said that, today, as it is a special day, we have to probably have a type of self-criticism, reflect over the experience, but also note that it is deplorable that Africa still has no continental development plan and is lost in the maze of the so-called free trade area, which is why we are encouraging it in the direction of this alternative that I call panafricentricity. This actually renewal requires redeployment and the unity of the progressive forces. One of the pretexts of building this unity would be to launch an international and Pan-African conference on the land grabbing and plundering resources, mainly mining and fishing, especially agricultural land, following the example of the Trinidadian lawyer, Henry Sylvester Williams, for those who know him, who actually in 1900 launched an event devoted to this issue and gave impetus to Pan-Africanism. Then the work of, W. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Lamine Senghor, to name a few, Garant Kouyaté, Price Marsh, C.L.R. James, K.C. Hayford, Alioune Diop, with Présence Africaine around 1947 onwards, which actually propelled Pan-African congresses and projects. And their legacy, all this father of Pan-Africanism, is continued by their successors, such as Lumumba, Ben Barka, Fanon, Nkrumah, Cabral, Sankara, Rosa Parks, Makonnen, Malcolm X, Booker T. Washington, Jomo Kenyatta, Sheikh Anta Diop, Walter Rodney, Wangari Maathai, Chris Hani, in a way, Nelson Mandela, and so on. So these ancestors of the future still serve as a beacon in the accumulation by dispossession that seems to be taking precedence over extended reproduction, and I would go on through this. So it would be the coercion that the capitalist mode of development imposes at the political, social, cultural, and even psychological and economic level on disadvantaged humanity. So Pan-Africanism as a reconstitution of revolutionary Pan-Africanism allows not only for a critique of Western-centric Africanism, but also for an uncompromising, objective and historical rereading of Africa and its contribution to the advent of the world system. This requires the full recognition first, and at the event of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's phenomenon in 21st century, just to understand that the full recognition of the monocentric origin of humankind of humanity, which annihilates all form of racism and eugenics. Like all mankind came from Africa, and this had been, demonstrated in length. There is no race as such, and the re-establishment of the anteriority of Black African civilizations of antiquity and their contribution in medieval period, as well as those of the subsequent traditional period to the construction of the world capitalist system, mainly the 400-500 years. It is thus an understanding of how Africa served the periphery of Europe, i.e. The Americas, before itself becoming the periphery of the capitalist system it had helped to build. So transnational and plutocratic financialization is shaking up the exhausted mode of regulation and imposing what I call Supra Imperialism, which is actually the mix of the former imperialist system, but with a financial, very intense dimension that pushes back the known forms of globalization. So this supra-imperialism, supra from the Latin higher, au-dessus in French, designate the multiform extension of the space of capital in which different oligopolistic vectors try to influence the world economy. The multiplied expansion in the last 3 decades of financial assets, their hybrid forms of portfolios and derivative of and other forms of portfolio allow financialization to couple with an influence of the different sectors of productive life and consumption and induce structural changes in the global economy. So I have called supra-imperialism this particular form that neoliberalism takes in the segment of financialized oligopolies that had been reproducing itself in the last 3 decades. Its contradictions push it to intensify the predatory mode of production and consumption, despite the impasse to which it condemned it. The system's most acute contradiction will be between the senile triad, US, the United States, Japan, and Europe, and the emerging social formations of which the leading group, the BRICS, whether they are lower imperialism or they are just emerging countries, need to be debated. But this contradiction, this very acute contradiction, can both reinvigorate capitalism and hasten the chance of its restructuring in another direction, or precipitate the phenomenon of a polycentric world. So this provides that this country opt for a self-centered surge and a more polycentric world, but for the time being, they also look for Africa for predation, for plundering and dispossession. The class interest of their leaders and those of their people will be very decisive in this regard, and the case of South Africa alone is a microcosm of this. I think the world is in fact a type of apartheid world, and the apparent marginalization of Africa, if one considers its small importance in the trade of the world economy, conceals the degree of its overexploitation, conditioned by the demand of the profit rate of capital. Africa, which actually contributes so much to world growth, remains, for the most part of its social formation, still locked into the cash economy of the old international division of labor. It is differently integrated into the world order in successive waves in search of short-term profit, or for those areas which are not plundered yet, or to be kept as storage of what is not immediately profitable. So this world order rhymes with the Africa of resources Africa without Africans. And this is actually fueled by this geopolitic of chaos, the so-called war on terror, that is building this big belt called Sahelistan, stretching from the actual Sahel to the Horn of Africa and then Mozambique. This order rhymes more with the Africa of resources, now being sold off by transnational corporations and local statesmen and businessmen with quite little concern for the condition and the future of the African. That's why we call this elite comprador. Not saying that most leaders are comprador, but we do indeed have a lot of compradors in most of the African states. So the strategy of military control by the forces of imperialism over our resources and our resistance will not go away. And for those of you who have seen my film called AFRICOM Go Home, Foreign Bases Out of Africa, we have demonstrated in length and we have opposed the Pentagon and the CIA policies in Stuttgart, in Germany, where they stretch this huge base monitoring and controlling the so-called war on terror and coopting our military forces. So briefly, Pan-Africanism is also the self-criticism of the collaboration of the treachery that has allowed the perpetuation of servility and alienation and the continuation of compradors' form of power. Through them, we can say that Africa remains in this condition, maintaining it in an unjust and obsolete international division of labor, which is now renewed with predatory endogenous dynamics. And you can see that unproductive investment are mainly made in housing, in land grabbing, but the local middle bourgeoisie in most of our countries. And the rest of the society is left apart, functioning in the informal sector, which is basically a mercantile type of market-oriented, but in an informal way, type of strategy. You know, anyone like here actually in Senegal is becoming a merchant and sailor. So it's quite interesting to see how our societies have been embedded into the market and how everything is commodified and how everyone had to, for a living, to be on his own and selling anything that he could actually reach as a seller. So this is quite interesting in the type of phenomenon that the comprador are allowing in our countries. So the need for renewal involved the fight against the almost collective amnesia of the concrete history of Africa and its diaspora, but above all, by the necessary awakening from the lessons of the anti-imperialist and decolonization struggles, the negotiated independence, I have explained quickly in the beginning, and the national liberation struggles, and above all, the failure of the so-called institutionalist Pan-Africanism, which actually had allowed, the first organization of African unity and many institutions. The need of renewal also is to admit the still unfinished character of the total liberation of Africa and its diaspora from the wave of devastation brought about by imperialist expansion. So if I can say in French, ce qu'on aimerait voir, c'est qu'il y a une sorte d'aggiornamento, une sorte d'aller au-delà de la critique. La nécessité du renouveau passe donc par la lutte contre l'amnésie collective de l'histoire concrète de l'Afrique. Et cet aggiornamento, c'est-à-dire cette réorganisation hardie des forces du changement, notamment notre jeunesse, our youth, qui, malgré sa capacité d'indignation et de réaction, a vécu plus de 3 décennies, pendant au moins 30 ans, de dépolitisation, de désaffection politique. Et ce phénomène a été entretenu par nos États désengagé, downsized, de l'économie fonctionnant sous procuration des institutions de développement que par la réduction du champ de vision de la plupart de nos partis politiques qui étaient englués dans des scénarios de factice démocratie pluraliste, de coalitions artificiellement consensuelles et de sociétés civiles cooptées qui ont été instrumentalisées. Donc, on voit que les inégalités sociales augmentent. Elles augmentent si inexorablement que les dirigeants réformistes qui nous dirigent n'ont pas d'autre option que l'intégration dans l'économie mondiale, que de resserrer un peu la fiscalité, de la réglementer. Et pendant ce temps, vous voyez comment les sociétés résistent, comment les sociétés essayent parfois de rentrer en révolte active, ou parfois, plus dangereusement, comme on le voit, sombre dans les replis identitaires, dans le populisme et dans le culturalisme religieux et toutes sortes de fondamentalismes. Donc, tous ces phénomènes, en fait, sont dus au désarroi de la crise de sens. Donc, nous sommes astreints à un impératif de rupture et d'audace et à un immense effort de stratégie et d'unité, mais aussi avoir l'humilité de l'introspection, du respect de soi, du respect des autres. Et dans cet élan, je voudrais dire que le panafricentrage, si c'est une des doctrines africaines, doit être bien précisé. Je précise que afrocentré ou afrocentricité doivent être préférés à afrocentrisme. Parce que l'afrocentrisme, comme l'eurocentrisme, sont justement les formes de culturalisme, un intégrisme qu'il faut critiquer, dépasser, et qui demeure des impasses, dans laquelle même vous allez trouver des suprémacistes noirs sous la défense de la fierté, qui vont même aller jusqu'à dire que le noir est supérieur ou le noir est plus fort, etc. Alors que, comme on le sait, il n'y a pas de hiérarchie dans la race humaine. Donc, so basically, if this was clearly understood, what I call Pan-Africentrage or Pan-Africentricity proposed to be a doctrine that draws on reactivated roots. Pan-Africanism is based, on the one hand, the way I see it, on the philosophy of Ma'at. Ma'at in the sense of cosmic and personal balance, of truth, of social justice, as our ancestors in the Kemetic world were actually portraying this goddess and making sure that the political decision making and the leaders are following the true leadership and wisdom of this goddess called Ma'at. And this Ma'at had infiltrated many of our lifestyle, our way of life in the traditional African societies, where you do have modes of regulation that mainly are more and more forgotten or have been destroyed in a way by slavery and the colonial system. But there are a lot of persistent elements of Africanity, one being our own optimism, that we don't have fear of tomorrow, of anguish, as this is quite common in the Aryan world or in the Asian world. So to be an African is already to be grounded in those values. This Pan-Africentrage or Pan-Africentricity is also based, on the other hand, on a praxis of integrity, leading to a self-centered Pan-African internationalist, non-sexist, and ecological progress for a contribution to a polycentric world and the return in Africa of our diaspora. So I even coined a kind of word as historical materialism. And materialism here is not just the material basic elements that should be considered as, for obvious reasons, but also mat as a spiritual and cultural understanding of social justice, of balance. So even the word development, we have to look with scrutiny. Development is Entwicklung in German. It is a special word that have some interesting significance, mainly in the evolutionary world, but had been actually derailed from its significance through the capitalist mode of production, to the sake of, fueling the market and destroying the productive forces and destroying the environment. So growth being the only thing that development is trying to implement. So this historical materialism, to go back to what I'm trying to say, start from the historical condition of material existence of African men and women, apprehending their process of transformation and reproduction in order to achieve a revolutionary praxis. So it is incumbent on the working masses and organic intellectuals of Africa and the diaspora to forge this alternative against the predatory phases of globalization that only allow for comprador option and the chimerical continental integration. So we must learn to endure and counter the oppression by multiplying and channeling, like what you're doing today, thousands of networks and offshoots in the direction of this Pan-African drive. So Pan-Africanism is the process of political and historical consciousness of collective continental autonomy that favors, through a selective delinking with dominant capitalism, the control of our accumulation and its equitable redistribution. This type of Pan-Africanism promotes the re-evaluation of use value, not exchange value, but use value, and also the re-evaluation of our solidarities, a socio-cultural renewal, enabling Africa to make its active contribution to our era. So the condition of a revolutionary awakening are becoming increasingly clear because of the capitalist crisis of production and consumption and the ecological crisis that the pandemic had actually accelerated. So we are entering a period where state have borrowed a lot of money, that austerity is going to lurk around, even though the margin of maneuver of the state have been increased because of the necessity of tackling the crisis. It is quite easy to foresee that the next years to come, the debt issue and war as option are still around. So the condition for a revolutionary awakening are more and more building, and firstly because of the global financial crisis and the spreading of populism. From the closure of the archipelagos of prosperity, where you can see migration of young men, young women going toward the ocean, in the desert, towards this archipelagos of prosperity. And this disillusioned youth who have lost their horizon because they don't have any horizon on the future of their as a labor force, need to be addressed with dramatic and bold strategies. Their exasperation, which now affects more than just the poorest classes, is mixed with the despair that restrict the field of horizon clouded by the autumn of senile and predatory capitalist models. Finally, there is hope in a way, and this is why the Western world is so afraid of this slow building of Pan-Africanism. A recent French report actually put Pan-Africanism as one of the major threats in the 21st century. So this is a kind of hope. The breakthrough of the dawn that hint at the revolutionary advances timidly, I must admit, very timidly initiated here and there on the continent and in our diaspora. And often you have upheaval because of the economic crisis. And we need to channel all this energy. So Pan-Africanism is a balanced development in the way I see it, that required the expansion of the room for maneuver of the African states. First of all, through agrarian land reform, the issue of land grabbing, on the issue of food self-sufficiency. We need organic farming methods and appropriated technologies. It is a question of producing and processing upstream and downstream of the most organic agriculture possible, and according to a different law of value. So here you have to balance rural and urban income. You have to balance the issue of full employment strategy, fair production and processing prices, etc., etc. And this project of revolutionary Pan-Africanism has the form of collective self-reliance, i.e. Allowing the exchange of products between areas and equalization between surplus and deficit areas. Productivity in all areas of activity can be spectacular when you harness this type of agriculture. We have, okay, muchas gracias. And allowing the exchange of products between area, as I was saying, of surplus and deficit areas. So a bioorganic use of agriculture, no longer using chemical inputs and recycling all its waste is possible. For example, you can have biogas that can easily be produced, which cleans up villages and towns while providing energy, and also coupled with other renewable energies like solar energy, windmill, and so on, to meet the energy needs of communities. Also, even the trades that prepare agriculture and those that process it attract people who escape the rural exodus because they have a better income and a better quality of life. So this agricultural system, organic agriculture, biomass, crop rotation, percolation, green pesticide, etc., is falsely described as less productive by the pesticide and chemical fertilizer and biotechnology industries. But in fact, it's not true. A better professional concentration per hectare is possible with this integrated intensive model, preserving the surrounding environment and the sustainability of our arable ecosystems. So this is something that looks like permaculture, permaculture model inserted in the reconstitution of our forestry, where we also have to fight against biopiracy, because this company actually patent our enzyme in our plants, and as it is their own plants and they have royalties on it. So we have to fight back and actually try to contain this biopiracy. We therefore advocate for a sustainable development, self-sustaining balancing system, which is at the heart of building of domestic market for mass consumption, that would actually be focused on our products and imports, selectively focused on our basic needs. So this Pan-African or this Pan-Africanization or Pan-Africentrage requires moving beyond institutional integration and accelerating the process toward a federal or a confederal state to defeat predatory capitalism and foreign military occupation at all levels. I have expressed that also in my film on Samir Amin, the organic internationalist, where there is a lot of things to be learned from the young generation. after more than 60 years of involvement as an organic intellectual, Samir Amin had left us with many, many tips regarding this issue of how we can really accelerate through delinking and through self-reliant development. There are obviously many, many obstacles that remain to the advent of Pan-Africanism. You know, we can briefly identify the imminent strategic horizons that will condition the future struggle of Africa and its diaspora. And that could lead to the triumph with the help of internationalists from the North, like it was in the anti-apartheid period. First of all, as I've said, the expansion of the state's room for maneuver and a bold and daring move towards confederated Pan-Africanism, among other things that need to be raised. And the list is not exhaustive, obviously, but we can go through them. So, en français, je dirais que le panafricanisme nécessite de dépasser l'intégration institutionnelle et accélérer le processus vers l'État fédéral ou l'État confédéral pour mettre en déroute le capitalisme prédateur et l'occupation militaire étrangère à tous les niveaux, du national au continental. Bien sûr, il y a plusieurs obstacles pour l'avènement de ce panafricentrage, mais je veux donner une liste qui n'est pas exhaustive. D'abord, la question de l'autosuffisance alimentaire, la réforme agraire, la modernisation agricole au rythme de chaque société. L'avènement de marchés de biens de consommation de masse pour la satisfaction des besoins essentiels. C'est l'eau, l'alimentation, une maison, l'éducation, les soins de santé, des choses minimales que tout le monde doit avoir. La nationalisation des ressources dans une perspective de participation citoyenne et patriotique. La nationalisation, c'est 50% et 1. Aujourd'hui, la plupart des pays africains n'ont même pas 4 à 10% des redevances de leurs ressources et matières premières. Donc, c'est important, si on veut construire un grand développement, que nous soyons maîtres de nos ressources nationales. Une industrialisation légère et continentale qui est accélérée par ce que j'appelle la complémentarité par péréquation. Donc, il faut voir les zones, les travaux de Cheikh Anta Diop, par exemple, montrent, ou de Kwame Nkrumah, montrent effectivement les grands ensembles d'industrialisation selon les ressources et les complémentarités par région. Une question qui est très importante, c'est comment on fonctionne dans cette industrialisation. On peut miser sur des brevets qui sont obsolescents, sur des brevets à notre rythme, sur des technologies appropriées qui soient à notre portée et à nos moyens. Il y a d'autres questions qui, par exemple, ici, on est dans la zone économique du CFA, le franc CFA qui va devenir l'éco, et l'enjeu, c'est d'avoir une monnaie continentale. Donc, une banque centrale avec une monnaie continentale, ce serait vraiment quelque chose de formidable où l'Afrique participe au panier de devises. Et là, nous aurions d'autres éléments institutionnels comme un parlement bi- ou tricontinental sur les grands enjeux du développement et de la sécurité. On pourrait avoir donc des députés qui travaillent sur les grands enjeux. On pourrait avoir des éléments de supranationalité où l'État renonce à certains des attributs de sa souveraineté pour justement une dimension continentale. Ça suppose aussi la question de la défense nationale panafricaine. Donc, une armée continentale, chacune des formations sociales pourrait donner des soldats, une brigade civile de prévention des conflits, une brigade de reconstruction post-conflit, développer notre coopération internationale par une coopération tricontinentale, une coopération de type sud-sud contre la spéculation, avec des gens qui nous aideraient de par le monde, avec des internationalistes qui nous aideraient de par le monde, qui partagent notre lutte contre l'impunité, notre lutte contre l'enrichissement illicite et l'atteinte des droits de la personne. So as I was saying, we can certainly have nationalization of our resources in a perspective of citizen and patriotic participation, a very light industrialization to complement agriculture and rebalancing of urban-rural income, accelerate the regional continental integration through a series of phenomena, central bank, continental currency, to rely on patent and appropriate technology within our reach and means, have a parliament, a real Pan-African parliament where major development and securities issues are discussed, have a continental army and a civilian brigade for conflict prevention, for post-conflict reconstruction, and start building cooperation on a South-South free-flowing international relations against speculation. So repatriate most of the assets that are stolen and hidden in the global north, with the help of internationalists from the global north who share our struggle against impunity, illicit enrichment, and the violation of human rights. Fight collectively to refuse to pay the debt, this odious debt, win poverty selling programs, and also push together to reform institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, and really have a mandatory internationalist cooperation kept at the famous 0.7% of GDP. That is not tied. As you know, most of the Western countries have never reached even half of the GDP in foreign aid. But the major issue is the full emancipation of women, starting with the education of the youth from a very early age on changing male attitude, mentality towards women, issue of cultural alienation with the democratic re-politicization of the masses, self-organization against imperialism, comprador regimes, and anti-progressive behaviors. And this is where the youth are so important. The youth have to become more involved in policies, in politics as a whole, and not consider that their participation in the virtual world of Facebook and so on is in fact the strategy. This is just one tool of making policy. You have to be involved into the real life politics of the street and in the country, in the household, and to participate in decision making by being part of the socio-political mechanisms. As I said, culturally, we have to decipher irresponsible, consumerist, and ostentatious behavior and rediscover pattern of solidarity, rediscover our Africanity, not with nostalgic and culturalist way, but to at least keep what is now left and try to understand why it was like that. Why is it so good not to be individualistic? Why is it important to have a family, to have friends, etc., and to cherish values instead of exchange value? There is things that you cannot buy, things that have no price, that just have value. This is friendship, this is love, this is water, this is nature, and those are the things we need to worship and really save. So we have to save natural and environmental resources through civic, and I insist on the civic, that we have to learn to be good citizens and to have civic and ecological behavior. And this is how slowly with days like today, we can certainly celebrate, but also understand our cultures, our political horizon by organizing the forces of the progressive diaspora and the continents living and the continent living forces towards Pan-Africanism, and maybe why not towards Pan-Africentrage, which would be my dearest dream, is to have a self-reliant progressive system that really push and accelerate the former Pan-Africanist system. And also to bear in mind that there's so many of our sisters and brothers in the Americas and everywhere, like all generation from the slavery period to the past migrations. We have stratas of the diasporic people, and we have to organize through Pan-Africanism the slow return of African diaspora volunteers from the Americas people that already we know are fighting for reparations, are fighting for their rights where they are. They need to be supported, but also they need to seek asylum in a free and modern Africa. And this is why what we are trying to do is to work for a progressive and a polycentric humanist world and the preservation of common goods. I think if we start by really fighting for the common goods, I don't like the word goods, but at least for the commons, we can have real, a step to which we at least agree to start this praxis of Pan-Africanism, and to work for a progressive and polycentric humanist world through responsible and popular development is absolutely possible. We can learn from the liberation struggle, and the liberation struggles have taught us that we can organize, we can be very effective when it comes to fight against a very strong enemy. And I was very fortunate to have witnessed and be part of the anti-apartheid work. And I can bet you that if people of our generation have done this, I'm sure the youth and the next generation to come will understand more and more why it is important to go towards this direction. Donc, très brièvement, je viens à ma conclusion. Je crois que l'avenir de l'Afrique repose sur sa capacité de compter sur ses propres forces, de rompre avec la logique marchande du système capitaliste et son aliénation. Bien sûr, il faut changer les mentalités, il faut lutter contre les régimes compradors, il faut lutter contre les présences de l'impérialisme en regardant comment nous avons lutté dans la lutte contre l'apartheid et en soutenant les forces progressistes. Et je demande votre soutien dans ce procès de l'affaire de Thomas Sankara depuis 24 ans avec nos avocats. J'ai l'honneur de coordonner. Nous essayons vraiment de faire tomber une partie de la France-Afrique qui, malheureusement, a gangréné une partie de l'Afrique francophone. Voilà, c'était tout ce que j'avais à vous dire. Bonne fête de la libération de l'Afrique à tous et à toutes. Thank you.
Alors, donc, merci pour Aziz de cette présentation de notre sujet d'aujourd'hui. Aujourd'hui, on est là, comme a dit tout à l'heure Wepolo, un ensemble de sessions repenser le panafricanisme et bien sûr repenser le panafricanisme des penseurs, des grands penseurs révolutionnaires qui ont développé le concept, et aussi après ces 158 années maintenant qui sont passées déjà sur le concept, comment aujourd'hui, dans la nouvelle situation actuelle, essayer de repenser ce panafricanisme et comme le propose Aziz, le panafricentrage avec un ensemble de propositions qu'il a formulées. Et donc là, on va commencer la discussion. Donc j'ai noté pas mal de questions qui sont venues déjà sur le chat. Et on pourrait, si jamais je n'ai pas bien formulé la question, que les gens qui ont posé les questions peuvent lever leurs mains pour les poser directement. Donc, je commence par une question de John Wani, donc, qui pose la question. Excusez-moi, je vois la question. Ma question est de savoir ce qui peut être fait pour améliorer le niveau d'éducation populaire pour que les masses en Afrique soient informées des réalités qui ont maintenu l'Afrique pauvre, opprimée et exploitée. Ce qui me préoccupe, c'est le niveau d'ignorance que nous avons sur le continent et comment pouvons-nous le dépasser en nous assurant que les gens sont informés du droit entre aller dans la bonne direction en termes de libération de l'esprit. Parce que je comprends qu'ils doivent être une libération de l'esprit, de la conscience et de l'intellect avant que nous puissions atteindre la libération politique et économique. Aziz, tu veux qu'on pose 2 ou 3 questions que tu répondes, ou bien je te pose toutes les questions et toi,
on peut les prendre en rafale, peut-être 2, 3. Comme vous savez, j'ai un autre événement à l'université, une autre conférence. En fait, j'ai 4 conférences aujourd'hui, donc c'est la folie. Et on a commencé à 7 h du matin, donc il a fallu quitter à 6 h du matin pour me faire une émission. Mais je suis bien sûr heureux de participer. Donc, si on peut les prendre par 3, ce serait bien agréable.
D'accord. Donc, ce que je propose à nos participants, c'est que les questions que j'ai notées maintenant, je vais directement les poser, mais par la suite, que les participants peuvent lever la main, comme ça ils poseront directement les questions et on facilitera la tâche. OK. Donc, pour la deuxième question, c'est de Hassan Lorgat. Donc, je me demandais si nous pourrions explorer quelles classes populaires soutiennent la politique de la nouvelle panafricanisation. Le projet d'avant était-il mené et argumenté par des dirigeants États ou un individu ou un groupe d'intellectuels? Je demande aux organisations, aux ouvriers, les syndicats, aux paysans, aux groupes étudiants, aux organisations de femmes, etc. Il semblerait que ces formations ne soient généralement pas bien organisées, pas coordonnées et avec d'autres groupes sur le continent. Sans cette base populaire qui plaide pour l'utilisation de nos ressources naturelles pour notre peuple, est devenu un terrain de pillage parmi les élites en collusion avec d'anciens maîtres coloniaux et néocoloniaux. La troisième question, si tu permets, Aziz, c'est comment la petite localité bénéficiera-t-elle dans l'aspect agricole de la justice? Aziz, si tu permets.
Répète, comment la petite localité
bénéficie-t-elle dans l'aspect agricole de la justice? Quand c'était posé en anglais. Donc, je peux demander à celui qui a posé directement, ou à celle qui a posé directement la question c'est Justice Timikare. S'il te plaît, tu peux poser directement la question, comme ça. Celui qui a posé, ou celle qui a posé la question sur les petites localités. C'était posé en anglais. Donc,
mais les 2 premières questions sont quand même assez précises. Hein. La première question tombe sur l'enjeu de l'éducation. Vous savez, cette question de l'éducation, elle est centrale.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes, okay.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Yeah, my question.
Okay.
Yeah. I am Justice Timikare.
Vas-y, tu poses ta question.
I don't speak French.
Speak in English.
Okay. I was contemplating on the question like, how can the localities benefit from the agricultural sector in Africa, when it got to do with Pan Africa, been helping the societies? That's my question.
Okay. Basically, I wonder if when you say local, you mean in the local household, in the countryside?
Yeah, in the countryside, like perhaps Nigeria.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the policy that we promote is obviously from the periphery to the core. So it means that the energy is put on supporting the need of the peasantry first. So it means that the local forces are the main target going now towards those who have been already privileged. So we are focusing on those who are mainly in need, mainly women and the peasantry, and the youth for the global force. So on the local level, it is true that it is the Pan-Africanist ideology that works, but whether you are in the suburb of Nairobi or you are in the countryside in Kenya or in Tunisia or elsewhere, the local force seems to be so tiny that you seem to not to have a grip on their real daily life. But in fact, we have a grip on their daily life as long as they comply with the values of Pan-Africanism. For sure, the development is at the scale of the area, but the philosophy is that you have a nebulosis of local area that are the reality of Africa itself. So if you put the development at a microcosmos level, at a very tiny level, you seem to implicate that you are not necessarily paying real attention to the local problems. And local problems are different from a place to another. And there is no general strategy that works everywhere. So you need to adapt to the reality of everywhere in order to really build a coherent and holistic system. Having said that, and this linked me to the first question, ça me ramène à la première question sur les enjeux de l'éducation. C'est une éducation et au cœur même du dispositif. Il faut que nos pays acceptent que c'est dans un très jeune âge qu'on va d'abord former dans nos langues nationales et idéalement en Swahili. Si on imaginait que dans nos langues nationales ou en Swahili, on formait de la maternelle à l'entrée aux 2 premières années du primaire le jeune dans sa langue et qu'on lui instruit les éléments civiques du panafricanisme, c'est clair qu'on forme en une génération des gens qui sont prêts à ce grand sacrifice que nous leur demandons de construire le continent panafricain pour le 21e siècle. Mais ça demande une très grande volonté politique qui, pour l'instant, fait défaut. Elle existe parfois dans des moments d'euphorie des libérations nationales, mais elle n'est pas à l'ordre du jour de la plupart des pays africains qui, pour l'instant, sont dans une position de gestion de l'enlisement, une position de gestion de leur rapport avec les anciennes forces néocoloniales et l'impérialisme. Et donc, à cause de ce rapport inégal, pour ne pas le confronter, ils ne veulent pas prendre ces dispositions populaires et nationales dans leur programme d'enseignement et dans la politisation démocratique de nos masses. Voilà pourquoi cette question est éminemment politique. La formation du sens civique panafricain, la formation pour un projet de développement panafricain dès le début dans les écoles, mais aussi dans la réforme du système de l'enseignement supérieur avec des investissements dans la jeunesse pour la construction d'un développement tourné vers l'Afrique et non pas tourné vers l'extérieur. Donc, vous voyez que nous parlons de choses relativement différentes.
Ok, merci Aziz. J'ai encore 2 intervenants qui ont levé la main, mais j'ai déjà une question, 2 questions posées par Samantha. Est-ce que Samantha pourrait directement poser ces 2 questions ou bien je les pose moi-même? Samantha, si tu entends, tu pourrais poser tes 2 questions directement. Merci.
It's fine, Omar. You can pose the question. Thank you.
OK. Donc, que voyez-vous comme les principales leçons de la longue histoire des luttes panafricaines qui sont pertinentes en ce moment contemporain? Ça, c'est la première partie de la question. La deuxième partie, est-ce que vous voyez comme les principales forces motrices de cette panafricanité que vous décriviez? Où vous voyez-vous des possibilités de vie? C'est compris, Aziz?
Non, pas la dernière phrase, pardon.
Samantha, est-ce que tu peux m'aider à poser clairement
ça a
la
été traduit
question?
de l'anglais?
C'est ça, oui.
Je m'excuse, mais je crois que ça a été mal traduit, donc je ne comprends pas très bien.
Samantha, tu poses directement la question, s'il te plaît, merci.
So comrades, it's quite similar to what Hassan was asking. So this vision, this idea of Pan-African centricity, where does the possibility for this ideal, what are the motive forces? Where is there the power for this to be realized? So where do you see elements of this vision in living practice? And where do you see the struggle for this emerging from?
Well, you know, as any brand new ideology, this is like a synthesis, going back to the Bandung spirit, going back to the fight of the Suez Canal, going back to the liberation of struggle in Congo and in South Africa, going back to the experiment that have been, you know, through Ghana or Algeria or Burkina Faso. So we are learning from those things. We are learning from the very long history and blending and trying to reinvent. So, you know, when you build an ideology, Pan-Africanism as such, you have Pan-Africanism from the right side, you have Pan-Africanism from the left, you have race Pan-Africanism, you have Pan-Africanism who actually don't want to have the North Africa part of it. There's people who think Pan-Africanism should be just among Black people and so on and so on. You have many families. My way of seeing is we need to have a different trend of Pan-Africanism. And I have coined this world, and history will say who is going to be using those tips and tools, in which way they apply. I have a preference for the working forces. I have a preference for women and labor force. I have a preference for the popular masses because the system is built to help these masses to really fight back the system where the oppression is strangling their daily life. So for sure, if we have means of reaching this population, slowly it will build. I think in a way, we already have seen our efforts in Burkina Faso. I have tried here in Senegal to build a huge movement with the left. We have failed, but it is a struggle. You know, it takes time for trade unions, for political forces to endorse a new philosophy. I'm quite optimistic. I'm not saying this is the magic bullet. I just say that I have learned from Cheikh Anta Diop, from Samir Amin, from Frantz Fanon and Cabral and so on, and I have blended and created a new way of thinking. And I ideally hope that maybe one day it will participate to a general movement of Pan-Africanist forces. So, very modestly, this is my tips. This is the work also that I'm trying to work within Guerrilla, the Group for Research and Initiative for Liberation of Africa, that exists since 1984 and actually strive for this type of strategy. Alors, il me reste une dizaine de minutes, Omar.
Ok, j'ai encore Aziz, plutôt 4 intervenants. D'abord, il y a un intervenant qui a levé la main, qui a écrit sa question et qui pose sa question: comment pouvons-nous arrêter les éléments OGM qui ont pris le contrôle du système? Et il y a une intervenante qui a levé la main, c'est Issa Kaboulou, Israël. Ici, Kaboulou, Israël, si j'ai bien prononcé, qu'il prend la parole pour poser sa question. Issa Kaboulou, Israël.
I want to ask a question. As it's bothering me, I thank God for.
Malheureusement, je ne l'entends pas.
On n'entend pas bien. S'il vous plaît, approchez du micro et parlez fortement.
You can hear me?
Yeah, maintenant, oui, c'est bien. Yes, now it's good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, from my observation, Africa is very vulnerable from the hands of the Chinese and the Orient. from what we have learned, Chinese are building house over 1 million in some part of the Africa countries. What plan do we have to salvage this situation in Africa?
On n'a pas très bien entendu la question, donc s'il vous plaît, reposez. On n'a pas bien entendu, on a un problème
de...
de...
qu'il l'écrive en attendant la troisième question. Comme je vous dis, voilà, je dois malheureusement me rendre à l'autre endroit.
Vous pouvez... combien de temps tu as encore avec nous, Aziz?
Écoute, à peine 4 minutes. Hein, parce que...
4 minutes?
Oui.
OK. Donc, que l'intervenant pose sa question directement en écrit, comme ça facilitera...
You get my question?
I think we have hard time hearing you. If it's possible to write the question. Je vais rapidement répondre à la question des OGM.
OK, donc on n'entend pas qu'il...
Les aliments génétiquement
modifiés. Donc, on lui demande d'écrire sa question parce qu'on a un problème de son et on perd beaucoup de temps. Et le Aziz a... OK, merci beaucoup.
Esikabulu, Israel, if it's possible to write your question because we don't hear you. Très rapidement pour la question des OGM, vous savez, la technicité de l'agriculture et les éléments par lesquels la science est en train d'évoluer font que de plus en plus, en raison des critères de production, les firmes transnationales ont pesé de tout leur poids pour transformer ce qui semblait être l'agriculture industrielle vers une agriculture de plus en plus génétiquement modifiée. C'est-à-dire qu'on vient carrément dans la cellule de la plante. Avant, c'était des plantes améliorées. Là, c'est des plantes génétiquement modifiées qui, en plus, font disparaître la biodiversité. Et donc, ici, nous disons effectivement, il faut lutter dans la plupart de ces cas-là. Peut-être pour les semences améliorées, on peut les accepter, mais lutter vraiment contre ces éléments génétiquement modifiés. D'abord parce que il faut obliger l'étiquetage des produits de consommation. Ensuite, il faut refuser, au nom de la diversité de la palette des agricultures, que ces monocultures et ces produits génétiquement modifiés ne viennent véritablement contrer nos systèmes. Donc, il y a une grande éducation des gouvernements, des consommateurs, des agriculteurs sur la réalité vraiment de ce rapport de force avec ces grandes compagnies qui ont beaucoup de moyens et qui exigent, on le sait depuis la Révolution verte, c'est là que les choses ont commencé, ce n'était encore pas génétiquement modifié, c'était avec la Révolution verte qu'on a compris que tout ce qui est modifié en agriculture exige de nouveaux pesticides, de nouveaux engrais et un plus grand endettement des agriculteurs. Donc, comme je l'ai dit précédemment, nous pouvons avoir des agriculteurs organiques et préserver la biodiversité.
OK, donc j'ai juste ici 3 petites questions, je crois qu'ils se complètent et que tu pourras répondre parce qu'ils touchent le même aspect. Donc, comment pouvons-nous intégrer et inculquer efficacement les croyances et les pratiques du panafricanisme dans notre culture et nos styles de vie locaux? Ça, c'est la première question. La deuxième petite question, notre diversité en Afrique dans les langues, la culture et la religion n'est-elle pas notre chute face au panafricanisme? Qu'en pensez-vous du racisme?
N'est-elle pas notre
chute face au panafricanisme?
Okay.
Pensez-vous du racisme? Que pensez-vous du racisme qui est entre nous en tant que Noirs? Voilà les 3 petites questions.
Voilà, donc les sociétés africaines sont originellement de type xénophile. Elles ont créé des modes de régulation lorsqu'elles étaient en conflit. En général, la plupart des sociétés africaines sont xénophiles, aiment l'étranger, sont hospitalières. Maintenant, les rivalités qu'ont introduit les éléments d'esclavage, y compris la participation de certaines sociétés africaines, ont généré, en plus de la colonisation, des rapports conflictuels entre certains groupes. Mais c'est des choses qui pourraient être dépassées dans l'espace d'une génération, là où des conflits existent. Et ça m'amène aux autres éléments, c'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a pas de tare génétiquement africaine sur ces enjeux-là. Sur la question de... la première question était vraiment sur, rappelez-moi, l'aspect de la... Je pense qu'il voulait parler à la fois de l'éducation et si les langues africaines n'étaient pas un obstacle, en fait, c'est une force. La palette des langues, bien sûr, il y en a beaucoup qui sont issus des mêmes rameaux, il faut que les linguistes puissent nous discerner celles qui peuvent permettre non seulement une utilisation scientifique des éléments du développement, mais d'aucune façon la langue est un obstacle. Si vous êtes polyglotte, si vous parlez plusieurs langues, c'est plutôt un plus. Plusieurs de nos sociétés africaines se côtoient dans des environnements où des personnes parlent 5 à 6 langues naturellement sans qu'on se pâme de leurs possibilités. Donc, je crois que ça fait partie des avantages que nous avons. Et sur la première question, elle avait trait à Omar.
Pardon?
La première question, c'était le...
Je l'ai, la première question. OK, donc en cherchant la première question, j'ai encore deux dernières questions,
Oh,
si
Omar,
tu
je ne
permets,
pourrais pas
Aziz.
les prendre, je suis désolé, je vais vraiment être en retard. Il va falloir que ces
Donc,
personnes-là...
ce n'est pas possible?
Mais oui, il va falloir que ces personnes-là m'écrivent. Vous pouvez donner mon site web, azizsalmonefall.com. Je réponds à toutes les questions. Je pourrais prendre une dernière en guise de conclusion.
Une dernière en guise de conclusion. Que pensez-vous de la création? Pensez-vous que la création d'un État panafricain est une priorité de nos gouvernants?
Non, ce n'est pas une priorité des gouvernants, c'est une priorité des gens comme nous. La plupart des chefs d'État voient d'un très mauvais œil la perspective de renoncer aux prérogatives qui sont les leurs, de léguer des éléments de souveraineté à une entité supérieure. Mais il faut pousser ces chefs de gouvernement à aller vers cela et de façon plus accélérée, pas de façon théâtrale et symbolique, de façon concrète, avec vraiment des mécanismes de décision, de révocabilité. C'est un processus. L'Europe s'est construite sous nos yeux. C'est des gens qui se sont battus pendant des siècles et qui sont aujourd'hui un seul espace, qui est l'espace Schengen, une seule monnaie. L'Afrique n'a jamais eu à tomber dans 2 guerres mondiales et à s'entretuer à l'instar des pays européens. C'est donc quelque chose que nous pouvons faire à notre portée. Je suis tout à fait convaincu qu'avec une culture panafricaine de plus en plus répandue, nous irons vers l'État fédéral. Voilà. I'm really sorry, guys, as I have to rush to go 20 minutes from here to the university where I have to lecture on the impunity case of Thomas Sankara. This is the first of a series of conferences I'm giving here in Dakar until May 31st. And I really apologize about this, but it is such a tight agenda, as you know, for Africa Liberation Day. We are all committed people, and I'm just delighted, Samantha and all the crew, for participating, and thanking you, all of you, for having me for the first of your series.
Merci beaucoup, Aziz. C'est très impressionnant, très passionnant d'être avec vous. Malheureusement, le temps est très limité. Donc, vous pourrez répondre. Les gens,
voilà.
on a vraiment le stress des gens qui n'ont pas pu avoir les réponses à leurs questions. Mais je pense qu'ils vont vous envoyer les questions et vous répondrez volontairement.
Oui, et puis, c'est-à-dire, vous pouvez quand même continuer à débattre sans moi, s'il vous plaît. Surtout, n'arrêtez pas à cause de moi, parce que c'est important qu'il y ait un débat qui continue sur tous ces enjeux. Je sais qu'il y a plein de gens qui ont beaucoup d'autorité dans la salle, autant que moi, qui peuvent continuer à débattre. Et j'espère que j'aurai la chance de vous serrer la main un jour à tous et à toutes.
D'accord, merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Aziz. Allez, au revoir et bon courage. Allez, merci beaucoup. Ciao, ciao. Bon, pour nous, Samantha, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Est-ce qu'on reste à terminer un peu parce qu'on on est dans le temps. Est-ce qu'on se permet de discuter un peu une vingtaine de minutes ou bien est-ce qu'on close cette session? Qu'est-ce que vous préférez? Si vous avez encore envie à discuter, je crois qu'on pourra échanger entre nous. Est-ce qu'il y a des avis là-dessus? Vous pouvez dire votre opinion. Est-ce qu'on pourrait continuer pour combien de temps? Et si vous êtes intéressé à échanger encore beaucoup plus, ça serait mieux. Une vingtaine de minutes ou une trentaine, ça dépend. Sinon, on va clore la session.
Comrades, thank you, Omar, for chairing. We had agreed on a 1.5-hour session, so I think we should be concluding. But as Boipelo has indicated in the chat box, this is the first in a series of sessions on Pan-Africanism. We will explore different dimensions of it, from Pan-Africanism and the diaspora to thinking about ecology in the context of Pan-Africanism. We will also, on the 16th of June, we're going to have a fantastic session with Issa Shivji. The details are here: Marxism in Africa, class struggle, and the materialist conception of history. Issa Shivji is a very well-known Tanzanian theorist and activist, so we will have the chance to explore many questions that are arising in the months of discussion amongst us to come. So Issa Shivji will speak on Sunday, the 13th of June. It'll be at 2 p.m. GMT, 4 p.m. South Africa, 5 p.m. Kenya, and 2 p.m. in Senegal. So I think over to you, Omar, to just conclude and thank everyone. Thanks so much. It's been a wonderful session.
Merci beaucoup, Samantha. Donc, on est arrivé à la fin de ce webinaire qui est vraiment très intéressant. Ce n'est qu'un début, comme tu as dit. Donc, on aura encore des sessions pour approfondir la question sur plusieurs aspects. Donc, vous allez suivre avec nous les différents programmes. Et donc, l'essentiel, c'était ce panafricanisme que nous souhaitons être un panafricanisme des peuples, un panafricanisme de lutte contre le capitalisme et contre cette mondialisation néolibérale. Donc, je remercie tous les participants et les participantes à cette session et aussi l'équipe technique qui a veillé sur la réussite de cette session. Et on aura encore les occasions pour se rencontrer et approfondir la discussion. Donc, merci à tous et à toutes et à la prochaine session. Au revoir.
Au revoir, merci.
Au revoir,
Omar.
thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Au revoir. Merci.
Allez,
Merci, Aziz.
ciao.
Thank you, Aziz. Thank you all
Aziz.
fans that presented themselves here.
Au revoir. Au revoir. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
I see you, Justice. I see you, Victor. I see everybody from Nigeria.
Thank you.
I see you, Ekato. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Crossdale. I go.